So hello, everyone. My name is Larry Schaefer. I am owner winemaker of Tercera Wines here in Santa Barbara County. I'm also vice president of the board of directors of the Rhone Rangers. I want to welcome you to our Zoom this month as a celebration of Grenache in honor of International Grenache Day, which is actually tomorrow. I'm really excited to take part in this panel, to moderate this panel, and to talk to the 5 guests that we have here today. Grenache is a personal favorite variety of mine. To me, it's one of the most versatile varieties out there. Love the history of it and love the diversity of it as well. I'm joined again by 5 different winemakers from 2 of them from Santa Barbara County, but then other regions both in the state of California and outside the state of California as well, because Grenache certainly has grown in other places other than just California. Real briefly, a little history of Grenache. So actually, before I get into that, a little housekeeping. There is a chat screen and there's a Q&A screen. Feel free to ask any questions along the way as we're doing this seminar. There's going to be a lot of information shared, and if anyone has any questions about that, I would love to share those questions with our panelists and have them answer that information as well. So Grenache is thought to have originated in the Aragon region of Spain. The Italians believe it originated there, and they call it Cananal, but most people tend to believe it started in Aragon. During the reign of Aragon, it was brought into France and brought into Italy and brought elsewhere as well, along with varieties like Carignan. It was one of the most widely planted varieties out there. Actually, it was planted not as much as other varieties, but after phylloxera hit, it actually became more popular because it turned out it was easier to graft than other varieties. So at one point, Chateauneuf had more Mourvedre than it does Grenache. Now it's about 70% Grenache in Chateauneuf itself. It used to be the 2nd most widely planted variety in the world. Now it's about 7th most, but still a very important variety worldwide. It's seen a steep decline in California, mainly because it was grown in the Central Valley and it was used for basic jug wines for a very long time. But over the last 10 years, we've seen a real resurgence of high quality Grenache, both in Santa Barbara and the Paso area, as well as in Northern California as well. It is sparsely planted in Oregon, though we do have a producer here from Oregon that I'm really excited to have on board and talk about Grenache. Grenache is planted both in the southern part of Oregon as well as in the northern part of Oregon. I don't believe anyone has planted in the Willamette Valley, but I'm sure we're going to hear if that is the case or not. Grenache tends to enjoy warmer weather climates, not cooler weather climates, though it certainly is adapting itself to some cooler climates as well. A little bit about Grenache Blanc, since we're talking about all flavors of Grenache. Grenache Blanc is thought also to have originated in Spain as a naturally occurring genetic mutation of the red Grenache grape. It was discovered in northern Spain. It's still heavily planted there. The majority of acres planted worldwide are certainly in southern France. There's about 5,000 planted in Spain, and there's about 1,000 planted in the US, mainly in California. Starting to see it planted north as well into Oregon and into Washington as well. And then Grenache is also used, obviously, in Rosé. We're going to talk about Grenache Rosé with one of our presenters. There's an AOC in France called Tavel, where Grenache is the main variety planted. And then it's also used as a dessert wine elsewhere in the world. So Banyuls is a region in France as well, where Grenache, a fortified wine, is mainly made with Grenache. So all of that said, let's get into the wines here. So we're going to start with a Grenache Blanc. Sonja Magdevski from Casa du Metz, Clementine Carter, and the Feminist Party is going to go ahead and talk about that wine really briefly. I had the pleasure of meeting Sonja almost 20 years ago when she had just started making wine, bringing little samples to the little back office at Fess Parker for some feedback on wine. And it's such a pleasure to see how you've grown and the success you've had. It's a very, very warm feeling to me. She was a journalist by training and a winemaker by drive. The 2 professions challenged her to craft timeless stories as each vintage unravels a new vintage. Her attention and motivation is captured by creating aromatic, fresh wines that defy expectation. Her goal is to highlight the beauty and the bounty of Santa Barbara County wine country. They have a particular sweet spot for Rhone varieties wine sourced from cool climate vineyard partners in the Santa Rita Hills. Wine revealed itself to her later in life. I think that's true with a lot of us as well. The pursuit is really to discover paths towards peace, and wine certainly involves it as well. With a commitment to this landscape and the amazing humans that make wine happen, she does her part more effectively and joyously, one bottle at a time. She is starting her 19th vintage with Harvest 2023. And she has a tasting room that has been open since 2011 in a little city called Los Alamos, California. So Sonja, the board is yours.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I just recently joined the Rhone Rangers. I just wanted to get more exposure and create more exposure for this amazing group of grapes that I absolutely adore. The Grenache Blanc, Larry, as you had mentioned, there is very little planted, and there's very little planted in Santa Barbara County, which I've based my whole career on here, making wine. And so again, finding places and growers that grow and connect and do what we can all appreciate. You have to find a grower that you collaborate with, so then you can have somewhere to go and you can have a conversation to have in terms of how the season is going to progress. And so in this instance, for the Grenache Blanc, there's two vineyards. They're both organically farmed. One is Kimsey Vineyard in Ballard Canyon, right down the street from Larner, as we were talking about with Stephen earlier. And then the other vineyard is Tres Hermanas, which is on Alisos Canyon Road on the way, or Fox and Canyon Road all the way to Santa Maria. And Tres Hermanas is dry farmed, but not by choice. And so it's been very fascinating to see these vines kind of grow and evolve, and in the challenging vintages that we have, still kind of express themselves in such an amazing way. And so we were talking about the cold nature of earlier before we went on. Here in Santa Barbara, these last three vintages, we've had some challenges in terms of heat spikes, but overall, the vintages have been very cold. And so that, as Larry had also mentioned, Rhone varieties like a little more warmth, like to be grown in a place that you get a little more heat, a little more sun intensity. And these last 3 years have definitely been a challenge, and particularly for Grenache Blanc. And so even though both of these vineyards aren't in the coolest part of our cool climate, they are sort of in the Goldilocks zone. We've had a tremendous challenge in ripening. And so in the 22 vintage, I was trying to figure out, well, when you have 20 Grenache Blanc coming in at 20 bricks, like what's our goal? How can we create some kind of texture and aromatics and some intensity in there? And have some substance. And so I do a lot of carbonic fermentation with the reds that I work with. And so I thought, well, let's try this and let's see what happens. And so the Kimsey, we ferment carbonically on the skins for about 2 weeks. And then we press to tank at probably like 8 or 9 bricks. And then it finishes its fermentation in tank. And then the Tres Hermanas, we ferment in 1 concrete egg. And then we blend them together right before bottling. They see there's no SO2 at any point at all during crush or fermentation, and the only hit of SO2 it gets is right before bottling. And that's it. It's pretty basic winemaking. But again, the goal is to sort of how to create this substantial flavor and textural profile with something that, in a standard year, I would normally pick a little riper. But if you're picking at the end of October and the beginning of November and you're out of sunshine, you have to kind of make a choice. And so those are my decisions with this wine. And I love Grenache Blanc. I just love the ability for it to carry so many different ways. And so this is what we did in the 22 vintage.
Well, fantastic. It's a fascinating wine. It has some tremendous texture like you talked about. I'm assuming the carbonic certainly enables that to happen. Grenache Blanc is not a variety most people will have on the skins, just because the skins tend to be pretty bitter. And so it's, I think most people try to avoid that, but I'm not getting that in this wine at all. But I am getting some interesting other types of aromas and textures that I wouldn't normally find in this variety.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, to your point, why we chose to do it carbonically, just put the grapes in a bin and then let them sort of soften and ferment from the inside. So you can get that phenolic extraction without, hopefully, that tendency to extract sort of the tannin from the skins or the seeds or the stems, just to kind of give it a little more weight. That was sort of the goal. And then, to couple that with the fermentation of the concrete egg, also that elevated texture. And that was, again, it's all about fun and it's all about sort of creating something unique. And, what the hell? I was like, well, let's try it and see what happens. If you're not going to try, you're never going to know. And I've appreciated the results. So I think we'll continue in that vein.
Well, I think that's certainly in line with the general Rhone Ranger motto is let's try it and see what happens. That's one of the great things. I always love to use the term about Rhone Rangers and Rhone producers. We're wines without pretense. We're not scared to try different things. We're not scared to fail, but it's certainly fun to experiment. And I am finding what's really interesting is this wine does have a little bit, it has a very floral note and a very citrus note, but I'm also getting a slight banana note that comes from the carbonic. It's not overwhelming, but it's just a really interesting addition that is unexpected, but in a really pleasant way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
now, somebody did ask the question, does the concrete add any flavors to the Grenache Blanc that it wouldn't have otherwise?
Yeah, so that's a fascinating question. In 22 was the first time that I have worked with concrete. And, you know, it's really fascinating because before working with it, we have 2 eggs and we put Roussanne in one and Grenache Blanc in the other. And, you know, when you have other wines that have been treated with concrete or fermented in concrete or aged in concrete, that's what you know, but I never knew what they were like before that, right? So the things that I've appreciated about other people's wines in concrete, I only knew that one sort of area. And so what I've discovered, which was very fascinating to me, is when you have this grape and you have these flavor profiles, and the idea of the concrete was sort of add a textural component, but nothing happens in a void, right? So what I've discovered is that you only have so many pieces to work with. And so as the texture sort of elongates, the aromatics and the flavor, I imagine, is what, you know, the conversation is, that it shifts a little bit. And so that was surprising to me. I just thought it would be like, oh, all this flavor and all this texture and all this aromatic, but it has to kind of balance out. And so in terms of adding a flavor, there's no flavor addition because concrete is relatively neutral, right? You're not adding a flavor as you would sort of a new oak characteristic. You are sort of shifting the textural component that also shifts the aromatics and ultimately the flavor, if that helps answer the question in kind of a circular pattern. But it's been really fascinating to sort of work with it and discover, because, you know, you have expectations, or I have expectations of what I imagine would happen. And then ultimately the question is, well, what did happen? And so that it's been fascinating, and I've really appreciated the results.
So the question is, will you continue the experiment again next year?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the idea with concrete is the oxidation is going to be different than oak, and it's going to be obviously more than stainless steel. So the wine will be different. The question is, how different is it? And that's really going to be dependent upon the individual fermentation.
Yeah, and it's such an impossible, you know, if you lined up 30 wines and said which one's in concrete, I mean, I wouldn't be able to be like, oh, that one and 7 and 10 and 20, like I would not be able to pick that out. It's just that it's a very sort of subtle textural shift. And again, unless you know the winemaker and the style, it's complicated to pick out. But yeah, no, I'm a fan and I'm in love with it. So we'll keep doing it for certain. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. It's a beautiful wine. And thank you for joining the Rhone Rangers. We certainly appreciate it.
I'm super fan. So I'm very excited. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So next up is Sam Coturri from Winery 16600. Little brief introduction written by Sam. So it's a vineyard-focused winery that was founded in 2007 by Phil Coturri, along with his wife Arden Kremer and sons Max and Sam. We produce small batch single vineyard wines exclusively from certified organic vineyards that are farmed by Phil and his vineyard management company, Enterprise Vineyards. We produce wines that we love to drink and collect, Grenache, Rhone varieties, field blends, as well as Cabernet and Zinfandel to honor our Sonoma heritage. Our success is built by the dedicated work by our amazing team, particularly the vineyard team, winery team, and amazing souls who work with Sam in the office and tasting house. So Sam, thank you very much for joining me. A little aside, I remember back in the day having some of your dad's wines in the 90s and kind of being blown away by the distinctiveness of those wines. So it's nice to kind of come full circle and look at the next generation. So thank you and welcome for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm also a new member of the Rhone Rangers, and you know, something that you always kind of knew was happening out there, and then now that we're in the Rhone game, happy to be a participant and to be featured here today is just special. So and for me, it's special to talk about this wine in particular, the Têtes Rosé on Grenache Day, because if nothing else, what this wine really is a tribute to Philippe Combi, the late great god of Grenache. No other explanation needed, but one of the great Grenache fermenting minds. And so this Têtes is a Grenache only program that we do within 16600, sort of a special bottling. We do 3 wines, the Rosé, and then sort of dueling valleys, Rosé Ranch, Sonoma Valley, Grenache, and Oakville Ranch, Napa, Oakville District, Grenache. And the idea is just to explore how far we can kind of take it with making Grenache, and with the Rosé especially. It's ridiculously complicated winemaking, and this is Combi and Isabelle Gassier's protocols that we follow with our grapes. So with the 21, we actually picked it on September 10th. We were talking about before we went live, that we picked it on September 10th of 2021. As of today, which is September 14th, 2023, it's at 21 bricks, which I said was aspirational, a hopeful 21, and a 2.9 pH. So we're probably a couple weeks away from on this one, but we pick it, destem it, and do a 4-hour sort of cold soak, maceration, infusion on the skins, and then send it to the press. Isabelle loves to cut the press sort of like a heads and tails, like a distillation. So the very first juice that comes out of the press goes into a separate container. The heart of the press goes into a stainless steel, and then the hard press goes into another program. So this is sort of the pure expression of Grenache Rosé. And then it's once it starts fermenting, half of it is in stainless and half of it is in large format neutral puncheon. And then eventually, with Combi at first, and then now with Isabelle, we take all those component parts and taste through them and build the Têtes Rosé out of it. So really, it's I love talking about it on Grenache Day. This is Grenache Rosé elevated is certainly our intent, and every year, we figure it out a little bit more.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful. So the question is, with the 3 different press cuts or different parts, what percentages of each made it into the final blend, and is that different in 21 than it was in other years?
Yeah, well, we had some with this process, and also pursuing the 2 heads, Têtes, my father, Phil Coturri, and Philippe Combi, pursue absolute ripeness. And in 18 and 19, those wines they're aging beautifully, the rosés, but they were, they got pretty big. And I think part of that was we were a little heavier with the hard press. And so in 21, we tried to dial it back just a little bit. And really, I think my recollection of this is just pretty much purely what was aged, mostly in the oak, and then a little bit of the stainless. We'll put maybe 5% of the hard press in there to sort of fill it out, give a little texture. And then that stuff from the beginning mostly ends up in our 16600 Rosé.
Well, it is absolutely gorgeous. It's light on its feet. I don't tend to look at alcohol levels, especially with something like Grenache, because I don't think it necessarily tells a story. But this is about as light as a Grenache Rosé as you can get. It's about as far from Tavel as you can get. So obviously, it wasn't on the skins very much. And I would say the hard press probably didn't take much of a play in this. Just looking again how light and light on its feet is as well. Just highly aromatic and just very, very delicate as well.
Yeah, it's I think it's a tribute to the vintage. 21 was such a bounce back for us in so many ways from 20. We didn't make this wine in 20. It wasn't a year for skin contact rosé, to say the least. And so kind of bouncing back in 21, it was just sort of such a benevolent season for us. Had some heat, but there wasn't a whole lot of the calamities that we're so used to after the last decade or so. I think the wines are really showing that sort of that same elegance and they were relaxed. I think everybody after 2020, I think, the vines, the humans, the crew in the vineyard, the dogs and the sheep and the chickens, I think everybody kind of like took a deep breath. And I think you kind of taste that here.
That's a very cool way of thinking about it. So how long was this aged in oak?
This was 8 months or so. I'm trying to remember when we bottled it in 22. It's probably like mid-March. So pick September 10th, bottled mid-March. And then the other thing that we do, we really like intend this, and that's what that little bit of skin contact does. Somebody was doing, asked what the cold soak is for. We through that skin contact maceration, we're tasting it almost like every 20 minutes or so, and we're looking for just that first hint of bitterness that you're extracting some tannin, to give this some structure so it can age in a barrel and age in bottles. So the 21 is our current release on it. The 22 will release in the winter with the red wine from, I guess, 2021. We do like a 3-bottle package. So that barrel aging is really, I think, important to setting it up for life in the cellar. The 2018s are drinking great. I can't wait to see this one in a few years.
Fantastic. So I guess you have the same challenge I have making more better rosé, that current vintage, it doesn't really show off the wine for a couple of years, and it's a real challenge out there, but for those who have patience, I think they're really rewarded.
Yeah, I mean, patience in all things, right? Especially this vintage. Patience is a virtue we're gonna need. I have this theory that basically by the time you sell out a wine is when it really starts to taste good. And I think rosé is the same way. I think, and it's fine. They're out there and they serve their purpose, but I really believe in making rosé with the same level of intent and integrity that we make our white wine and our red wine with. And that means it's going to take some time for it to sort of relax and come out of its shell and taste its best. I love rosé with a year or two of age on it for sure.
Fantastic. And I love to hear that concept of the intent of this wine is as important as any of the other wines you produce. I think oftentimes rosés have this reputation of kind of a throwaway wine, and rosés are as serious a wine as any other wine that we produce if we kind of go about it that way. So to ask a question moving forward, is this still a project that you're going to continue with? And I know it's probably a little tough to talk about with Philippe no longer here, but
yeah. No, we went back and forth on it, and the thing that allows it to continue is his protege Isabelle Gassier, whose family in Costières de Nîmes has been clients of Philippe since she was a child, and she, he was an uncle to her. Her first job out of college was in his office, in his lab, and then she came here and worked for 3 or 4 years with us in the vineyards and helping with our Rhone production program. So she's taken, his vision and my dad's vision and run with it. And I couldn't be prouder of her and be, consider myself more lucky to work with somebody as talented as she is. So Têtes lives on. It'll always have Philippe Comby's name on the back of the bottle, but Isabelle's our new boss now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for sharing. It is absolutely beautiful.
Thanks, you guys. Happy Grenache Day.
Fantastic. Well, let's shift gears to red Grenache, and let's shift gears to the north of us in Oregon. Next up is Greg Jones from Abacela. For over 25 years, world-renowned wine climatologist Greg Jones has conducted research firmly linking weather and climate with grapevine growth, fruit chemistry, and wine characteristics in regions around the globe. He was named to Decanter Magazine's 2009 Power List, representing the top 50 most influential people in the world of wine, Oregon Wine Press 2009 Person of the Year, and listed among the most influential people in the U.S. wine industry. Jones serves as a director on the Oregon Wine Board, founding member of the Society for International Terroir Experts, contributor to the Porto Protocol, and member of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable. He has lifelong ties to the Oregon wine community, most closely as CEO of Abacela, his family winery and vineyards. He's also been a proponent for both Rhone and Spanish varieties in Oregon for a very long time, and is truly a pioneer with regards to that region. So welcome, Greg. I'm excited to have you on board.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. And it was a pleasure, actually. I really enjoyed hearing Sonja and Sam in their conversation. We're going to be planting some Grenache Blanc, so I maybe could ask a few questions. And Sam, I love the color of your rosé, because it really kind of matches what we try to do in terms of our wine. So Craig, can you go ahead and put the slides up? So the name of the company is Abacela, and frankly, I'm not the winemaker and I'm not the founding proprietor. My father and stepmother founded the property back in the early 90s when he was searching for a place to grow Spanish Iberian varietals. And but I've been with them for the whole time. And we're located in the Umpqua Valley, in the southern part of the valley. We're about 3.5 hours from Portland, about 1 hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours from the California border, about 50 miles to Bandon on the Oregon coast, and about 70 miles to Crater Lake in the mountains along the North Umpqua River. Beautiful area, very remote, rural kind of environment. Our AVA is a fairly big AVA, but we only have 30 producers and about 4,000 acres. So it's a relatively small area. Or I should say, Larry and I have the 2020 Umpqua Valley appellation Abacela Grenache. Grenache has been one of our 3 main varieties that we planted here, kind of the marquee of Tempranillo #1, Albarino #2, Grenache, and then Syrah #4. And so we've been playing across those varieties in some slightly different ways with them. And we produce a Grenache Rosé. We have multiple clones that we use for the Grenache Rosé. We also produce red Grenache every year. We have about a 35% of red production and 65 of rosé, about 1,500 to 1,600 cases every year total. The variety has been very good for us in a lot of different ways. We do have some challenges, probably just like most everybody else does, relative to how it performs. And this block right here on the left-hand side is the block where the grapes for this wine came from. It's about a 35% slope going down to a pond here that we use for wildlife. And it's mostly clone, the Albin clone, or with a little bit of Rioja clone in there. And as I said, we planted this initially in 1995. We added more acreage over the years. We have just over 11 acres now. We have a tendency to treat it. Again, I'm not the winemaker, but I have to tell you what I know. We tend to treat it a little bit more delicate than Syrah. We have a tendency to do cooler ferments, maybe around 85 degrees maximum for Grenache, where we'll let Syrah go up a little bit more. We have a tendency to use 100% neutral. And if we have enough puncheons, we'll put it in puncheons over standard barrels, just for a different kind of structure, kind of framework for it. Oh, what else can I say? You've asked some questions there, Larry, and I kind of looking at some of those questions now. Some challenges with Syrah or Grenache that I think is really important as well. We have shatter issues with Grenache here, and some clones in some years are worse than others. We can have 1 ton to the acre in a poor flowering period, all the way to 6 tons to the acre in a really good flowering period. So it varies quite a bit. We also have probably everything that you guys have, which is really sunburn limiting color. So we really try very hard to keep the westerly side of our canopies covering fruit as much as possible. I did a little project. I'm a scientist by heart and by trade. And I did a little project last year that looked at, I picked Syrah fruit that was exposed to the sun and hadn't really colored up completely, and Syrah fruit, or Grenache fruit, I'm sorry, that had colored up completely on the other side of the canopy. And I processed them in small lots, and the chemistry was exactly the same. all except color. So really interesting kind of situation. I'm probably going to start playing more with shade cloth in that warmer side of the canopy from year to year. What else are you interested in there, Larry?
Well, Sonja has a question, so go ahead.
I guess two questions. The first question I had before you just made your last comment was the thickness of your skins in Grenache. And second question is to sort of go after your last question is how different were the color differences between the two experiments that you just did?
Well, I didn't do very large volume fermentations. They were pretty small, so I didn't get a lot of difference in color. But it was enough to be what I would call a very light-bodied style Grenache versus a very more deeper, darker color body style. And it was pretty easy to see. We don't do a lot of hard pressing, especially on our Rosé for Grenache from Grenache. And we don't do that with our reds either. So ours have a tendency to be a little bit lighter. This 2020 is a little bit darker. It ended up coming in a little bit late, jumped up in sugar before we could catch it. But I think it's a pretty decent balanced wine. It has really kind of dark cherry, a little bit of grilled kind of plumminess to it that I think is pretty cool. And so I really like this wine. I don't know, Larry, what do you think?
Well, a couple things. First of all, it's interesting. It's the darkest of the three Grenaches that we have here. And I'm assuming, so it's 100% Grenache and not blended.
100% Grenache.
And then did you bleed any of it to create the Rosé, or was none of it bled off?
None of it was bled off. And this year just produced, I think, more Southern Rhone kind of fruit characteristics, a little deeper and darker, where most years we have a tendency to be a little bit more Northern Rhone kind of fruit characteristics.
And then one of the questions is the Rioja clone the same as the Garnacha Tina cloned? And maybe somebody else may be able to answer that question.
Good question. I didn't look at that. I just know that we have clone 3 for Alban, 362, and Rioja. And I didn't look deeper at the synonyms for those names.
And it's 100% neutral oak, correct?
100% neutral French. We blended for this production. We blended 14 barrels together to produce the wines.
And sorry to interrupt again. The thickness of the skins.
I'm sorry. I never answered your question.
Well, the reason I asked, because every time you sort of read anything on Grenache, it says the thin skinned grape of Grenache, and here in Santa Barbara, it is extraordinarily thick skinned, and so I wasn't sure how it behaved in your area.
So I'm just going to compare it to other things that we grow. It's definitely thicker skinned than some of the varieties we grow. It's not quite as thick as Tempranillo, but it's definitely thicker skinned than Syrah. It has a tendency to be in some years close to Tannat, which is something we have about 9 acres of and really like quite a bit.
Well, like I said, it's a beautiful wine. I'm getting a beautiful dusty character.
Yeah.
I know it says 15.3 on the label, but again, this is one of the situations where if I were to try this without seeing the label, there's no way I would think it's that high in alcohol. Yeah, it's a beautifully balanced wine that shows off some of the darker fruit character that Grenache can show off in a slightly cooler area.
Yeah, and you know, I think the two varieties that we have kind of this bump up in sugar late in the season are Grenache and Viognier. And if you don't pay attention to both of those, they can go from something that you might be just ideal on a Tuesday to being almost too high on a Thursday.
Grenache is definitely a variety that in some ways you have to make a deal with the devil, because the skins are, and I agree with Sonja, the skins can be very thick and bitter as well. And to me, one of the keys is waiting until that bitterness kind of subsides. And it's generally not going to happen at low sugar levels. So I always say that it's very difficult to find a 12% Grenache that really expresses the variety, that you are going to have to go higher than that in order to really get what I think the variety shows off best. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if Sam or anybody else has done this, but we've also played around with a couple of blocks that we let it carry upwards of 6.5 tons to the acre. And then we take off half of it for Rosé, and then we let the rest of it carry through. And that's worked pretty well. We've really liked the characteristics that come from it. But we got a long way to go to really kind of get a better kind of long-term kind of view of that, but it works decent for us.
We've a version of that sort of. I don't know if we've ever gone quite to that heavy of fruit loads, but oftentimes part of our rosé program, not Deux, but 16600 rosé, will be sort of late and aggressive green drops, or at least that's sort of how we think of it on the books. Sort of a glean of those clusters, and it doesn't necessarily, for us anyway, matter west side, east side, sunny side, or not of the vine. There's just some Grenache clusters, particularly, people are asking about clones. Particularly, we find that some of the tobless Grenache clones, some of those, for us, some of those clusters don't get full color, and we'll go and we'll sort of glean those, and they go into the rosé program. So yeah, you definitely do that thing, and it definitely helps the vines get that last bit of ripening on what's left on there. So serve multiple purposes.
Last year when we did the experiment, the Grenache Rosé came off at 3.1 tons to the acre at 20.5 bricks, and then the rest of it came off about 3.5 weeks later at 24.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. It's like I said, it's a beautiful wine, and everyone out there that has a chance should definitely get a hold of it. There are a couple of questions in the question and answer area that we're going to wait until after the last two presentations to cover. Casey for the Grenachista actually posted that clone 512 is the same as the Rioja clone. So maybe that's what that number is what somebody should be looking for if they're trying to compare clones. So I want to welcome Josh Bendick next. Josh is with Holly's Hill. He's half the winemaking team, where he shares his duties with his wife, Carrie. They're in the business with her mom, Holly, the winery's namesake. The vineyard is located in the El Dorado region of the Sierra foothills at nearly 3,000 feet elevation, and the winery is completely focused on producing Rhone variety wines. Josh also served on the Rhone Rangers board of directors in the past. I've been fortunate to have served with them for quite some time, and actually was the past president, as an instrumental in shining the light on Rhone varieties grown in the El Dorado Hills region of the Sierra foothills. So welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Larry. Good to see you again.
Great to see you too.
So we just bottled this 2022 Grenache just about a month ago. Grenache is our best-selling red wine, and for good reason. It's a crowd pleaser. It's easygoing, very food friendly, and I really like it for its fresh fruit. This particular vintage has cherry, strawberry, dried fig, herbs de Provence characters. So there I am with my other half, Carrie, at Chapoutier back in November. And then on the right, you can see a view from the tasting room, both in fall and winter. So like you said, we're at about 3,000 feet in elevation. So it's pretty high. We get all the seasons. And with mountainous terrain also comes like mountainous pests, like bears. So this wine isn't the darkest that we've ever made. I would say it's on the lighter side, but we had a really bad frost last year in April, the week of Easter. We lost about 80% of our crop in total. So we actually sourced Grenache from a lot of vineyards outside of our estate place, but also still within the El Dorado AVA. And what we found is the age of the vines is really important, especially for color. The first 10 years of our estate vineyard, like I was hearing earlier, there were a lot of clusters that didn't quite fully color up. There was a really big crop load, so we were dropping half the crop. But after about 10 years, things really changed. So we don't have to drop crop anymore. Color is much better. However, shatter, it always rains when Grenache is in bloom. So someone asked about what shatter is. Shatter is when not all of the flowers turn into the grapes. So you end up with this big cluster with very few grapes on it. And that's very that happens to Grenache all the time for us. We had a fire back in 2021, a big fire that burned all the way from us up to Tahoe, called the Caldor Fire. And when that happened, a lot of wildlife came down into the lower elevation areas. So when we were getting ready to pick the 22 vintage, we had bears in the vineyard. So this got picked earlier than we would normally pick things, just because we were racing with the bears. So the alcohol in this wine is under 14%. And with that lower sugar level, lower alcohols, there's also lower color. Question.
Go ahead, Sonja.
When you say bears, you mean like you'd be picking and you'd see a bear up the hill, or I mean?
No, the bears come through at night, but I mean, they can do so much damage in one night. It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Sorry.
So talk about the fermentation technique with this wine. Is this any whole cluster? Is it what type of fermentation temperatures are you shooting for? What clones of Grenache are you working with as well? I know I'm throwing out a lot at you, sorry.
Yeah, that's all great questions. So we have two clones that we grow here, the Alban clone and the so that's from Chateau Reyes and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And then we also have the Tables Creek clone from Beaucastel from Châteauneuf-du-Pape. We find them to be pretty similar. I think the differences could just be site specific. What were your other questions?
Just the fermentation methodology on the wine.
Right. So we're kind of maybe an old world style winery, I'd say. We don't like to use any new oak. Like Greg was saying earlier, we stick to neutral oak. We put Grenache like in this oval behind me, this 400-gallon oval. And we also use puncheons. And I would say the average age of our neutral oak is over 20 years old.
Fantastic. Well,
everything's crushed, destemmed. We inoculate with fancy yeasts. It's pretty simple.
It's an absolutely beautiful wine. I mean, I think that the flavor profile you described when you talked about the wine is dead on. It has this great structure about it, though, that is kind of surprising. I always love wines that look like they're going to be just light and ethereal, and this is, but then it has this structure on the back end that brings a real seriousness to it that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, so like I heard earlier, the tannin level can be real intense in Grenache, even though it's a light colored wine. And so when we're out in the vineyard, we're tasting, and you're tasting this, you taste the juice from the fruit, but then you keep chomping on the skin and you're like, oh wait, there's greenness there. And so we try not to pick until that greenness is gone. So there'll be tannins, but not greenness for sure.
Well, by waiting later, I mean, this wine has this beautiful floral potpourri quality about it too that is really surprising and really beautiful. Somebody did ask a question really quickly about what effect does the El Dorado soil and elevation have on Grenache?
So elevation basically gives us the cooling properties of our region. So we don't have the ocean influence to cool us. We have the elevation. So when we were talking before we started this webinar, I heard someone say their temperature was pushing 100. Someone else was saying 90s. Well, we were 84 today, which is the warmest day of the week for us. As far as soil goes, we have lots of different soils in our county. We have decomposed granite. You'll walk out into vineyards and it looks like you're on a beach. There are lava soils. We have right here, we're a Josephine soil. It's decomposed granite or schist and slate. And what's maybe more important than the soil type is the depth of the soil. So I know like down in the valley, UC Davis, those vines will go down over 100 feet. Here we have like 6 feet of soil and then you hit solid bedrock. So that really makes the vine small, just physically small, and makes them struggle to produce a lot of vegetative growth.
Fantastic. And there are other questions, but I do want to get to Stephen. He's been waiting so darn patiently. I know he's a very impatient person by nature. So I do want to ask one more question. So when we're hopefully done, there'll be an opportunity to ask some more. But Stephen, let me go ahead and get to you. Really brief introduction. Stephen has been making wine with Jaffurs since 2012, formerly the assistant winemaker with Craig Jaffurs. He took over as head winemaker for the 2017 vintage after the winery changed ownership. Jaffurs has been producing Rhone-inspired wines from top sites throughout Santa Barbara County since 1994. I've been fortunate to know Stephen for a long time as well, and it's a real pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you, Larry. I'm happy to participate.
Well, tell us about the wine that that you and I both have in front of us.
Yeah, so this is the one Grenache we make. It's from 2 vineyards in the Ballard Canyon, which is a sub-appellation in Santa Ynez Valley that's sort of right in the heart of Santa Barbara County. So Santa Barbara is really well known for its cool climate AVAs such as Santa Maria and Santa Rita Hills. But this comes in, you go a little further east on the valley and you get quite a dramatically warmer days and a bit more sunshine than in the western parts of the county. So it's not a hot site, but it's definitely a little bit warmer, which Rhone varietals really love. And Ballard has really made its name with Rhone varieties. It's planted almost exclusively to Rhone grapes, and we work with 3 different vineyards in that area. And 2 of them we use for this wine. Those 2 are Larner Vineyard and Stoltman Vineyard. So in the vineyard for this wine, for the growing, we leave a lot of leaves on the vines to shade the fruit on the outside of the vine. Grenache really likes to bleach out in the sun. So by shading it a little bit, it helps keep the color in the fruit. And then we tunnel the middle out. So we'll drop some clusters to create separation in the fruit and also to allow airflow through the clusters. And then in the winery, we ferment it with about 60% whole cluster stem inclusion. So we really like stems in our Grenache. I feel like it gives it really nice texture and kind of more complex savory flavor profiles. And then it is aged in neutral oak, as everyone else's red Grenaches, for about 10 months. So we bottle it a little bit earlier than some of our other red wines. I feel like Grenache likes to oxidize. So a little bit of an earlier bottling without any racking really keeps it held together nicely.
It's absolutely gorgeous. And I do believe the stems come through, but not in an obtuse way whatsoever. As you said, just to kind of add another level of complexity. And I think that's where stems work best for sure. So you work with a number of different varieties, obviously at Jaffurs. What makes Grenache something special for you to work with relative to the other varieties?
Yeah, I mean, we make a lot of Syrah and other varieties too, but Syrah is really what we're known for at Jaffurs. And Grenache is, to me, almost like a Rhone kind of almost Pinot-like expression, especially grown in Santa Barbara County. Santa Barbara Grenache tends to be, for me, very aromatic, a little more ethereal. It's kind of a more elegant expression of Grenache, and that's not just for Jaffurs. That's across the board with a lot of producers that make Grenache in this area. So we sort of lean into that style a little bit with using no new wood on it. It's 100% Grenache, so we really want the variety to shine, the varietal character to shine through. It's super versatile with food because it is a more medium-bodied red wine, so you can drink it with grilled fish and poultry and pork and a whole pasta, pizza, a whole wide variety. So it's a really versatile wine, which I really appreciate about it also.
I love the comparison with Pinot. I oftentimes use that comparison as well, not in terms of descriptors, but in terms of the transparency of the variety. I think for everyone who talks about how challenging it is to work with Pinot Noir, everyone here, I think, has talked about shatter issues with Grenache. Pinot doesn't have the bleaching issues that Grenache has. So, there's definitely some challenges with working with this variety as well. It's not something that everyone can do. And I think what's beautiful about, first of all, it's great to actually have 300% Grenache, red Grenaches in front of me. Grenache, historically, if you were to talk about Grenache 10 years ago, it was always a blending variety. It was never considered on its own because her nod was always to Chateauneuf and they always blended there. So people always felt that it needed something else. And it's wonderful to taste examples of wines that are complete, that have everything you'd want in a wine, but that really show off the uniqueness of the variety. So, and this is a great example of that. It really is beautiful. I know that in the past, you guys worked with Grenache from other vineyards as well. And it's, so have you decided to just narrow it because of flavor profile, or?
You know, honestly, so the first year, my first harvest at Jaffurs was 2012, and we got Grenache from a different vineyard that year from Thompson, which is another site we work with for Petite Syrah, Syrah, Mourvèdre. So that's a really important site for us. But since 2013, so for the last 10 years, we've been in these two vineyards for the Grenache. I like that they're close together, so it really shows the expression of Ballard Canyon, and they really complement each other. The Larner component has a little more structure and depth to it, a little more color as well, so it's a bit darker. And the Stoltman Grenache tends to be a little more floral, like kind of wild strawberry flavors, and lightens it up, and it's sort of like the pretty component to the wine. So they just work so well together, and we've had that that pairing in our Grenache bottling for 10 years or so.
Well, again, it's beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
So now I get to have a little bit of fun here, and I'm going to go off script a little bit. I had mentioned I sent an email to all of you prepping you for something, but now I'm going to throw a curveball. So I want each of you, if you can utilize one of your favorite artists. What artist would you describe your wine that I have in front of me here would be from, if that makes any sense? So Sonja, we'll start with you. What artist would you use as a descriptor of this wine?
In any field or category?
Sure.
Prince.
I'll use artist as a loose term.
Prince.
Prince, and why is that?
You know, can mold and meld and be very versatile in terms of expression and music style and fashion style, and just can be very flexible and still very, very intense in direction and focus and purpose and intention. Really, that's it.
And Yelp so beautifully too. All right, Sam, how about you?
So that's easy.
Oh man, Prince was a good call, Sonja. You know, all I think of now is wanting to make a Grenache and call it Purple Rain. You know, I'll keep going with the musician. I'm gonna throw Bob Dylan on this one. It's, you know, it has some folk roots, old school roots, but complications, complicated stuff. Yeah.
I was gonna say if I were you, I would call it Monet, but that's just me. So
all right, that was probably smarter. I should have paid more attention in art appreciation, I guess.
And Greg, what about you? Oh, I think you're muted. Got to unmute yourself.
My bad. Sorry about that. I knew you were going to ask me something that I know nothing about, but no, my wife is the musician in the family, but my mind initially went to flamenco artists, and maybe something like Gypsy King, Enrique Moriente. Those are the only ones I really know. Paco de Lucia. But anyway, flamenco, it just seems to work.
I can see that. This I'll fill in the blanks. It dances on your tongue nicely. How's that?
There you go. There you go.
And Josh, what about you?
I have to go with Harry Connick Jr. My first date with my wife was at a Harry Connick Jr. concert, and you know, Grenache is soulful and sultry and just a little bit behind the beat.
Very good. Very good.
Love it. And Stephen?
Yeah, when you said artists, my brain went to painters, and I like Degas kind of popped into my head, I guess, because it's sort of delicate and pretty, and you use the dancing analogy already, but it sort of does dance on the palette. So it's like pretty like ballerina paintings.
I love it. I can totally see that. That makes a great deal of sense. So we did have a question about clones. Can you state how the different clones produced, but I think that's probably going to be a little more intense and in depth in the 3 minutes that we have. One other question, Josh, a question about the flavor profile of El Dorado Grenache normally, if there is an overall flavor profile.
I find that wines from the foothills tend to have a spice quality that you don't find in other regions. And then there's also a bit of a floral hallmark, like a bit of a elegant quality, to sum it up briefly.
Fantastic. And then somebody did ask a question about high elevation Grenache. Josh, I think you're the only one working with high elevation Grenache. And the talking about Spain, how a lot of the Grenache is grown at elevation, and the challenges of doing that. I think you already addressed that a little bit in terms of snow and bears and things that we're not going to find. Generally, there are bears in Santa Barbara County. We have seen bears, but not very common. So Sonja, what were you going to say?
Well, just quickly, I would love to hear from everyone. I mean, for me, the question of clones, I know it's not this deep dive right now, but for me, site is definitely way more valuable than clone. So I didn't know how everyone else, and farming and site versus clone. So I don't know how everyone else felt about it in their region.
Well, I think for us, some of it was about what mistakes you made and what you could learn from them. And I don't know if any of our clones stand out enough for us to rip out all the others and put, go to all to that one clone. So I think having a little bit of diversity across clonal differences is a good thing.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about Grenache is it really is terroir driven, terroir forward. It shows site so well that it almost is more important than clones. I kind of like to play with different clones at different vineyard sites. Rossi Ranch, where it's a little warmer, is great for the Alban clone. In the Valley Floor, Tobless. But actually, the ones that I like the most are the heritage vines, Old Hill, Bedrock, places that, Grenache that has survived in Sonoma Valley for 130 years, 140 years. Those vines are the vines that we should be growing here. So that's what, we try and as much as possible, mix that into the mix.
And I'm going to assume those are the very large original Grenache clusters, which probably don't have a lot of color. Is that correct?
It kind of depends. The Old Hill, we've had really good color from. Again, you take those vines that thrived on the valley floor and then you stick them in rocky, harsh Moon Mountain District type conditions, and the berry shot size shrinks by 30%, and I think that probably helps sort of mitigate any color issues. You can shrink those big berries down a little bit and intensify things a little.
Cool. Well, I think we've run out of time. I think our time is up. So I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone on Zoom for joining us. I want to thank all of my panelists. You guys are awesome. I want to raise my glass to Philippe Cambie, and I want to raise my glass to International Grenache Day tomorrow. So I know we're celebrating it today, but remember to drink Grenache tomorrow in all of its colors. Cheers, everyone.
All weekend long.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Larry, thanks, Rhone Rangers.